Imagine a world where all wars stopped for sports, where enemies walked side by side without fear, where athletes competed naked before 40,000 screaming fans, where breaking the rules meant your statue was built from your own fine money as a warning to cheaters. For 1,200 years, this happened every 4 years in ancient Greece. Tonight, the Olympic Games that changed civilization forever. Let's travel back to a valley in western Greece, a place called Olympia. It's 776 BC, and you're standing in one of the most sacred locations in the ancient world. This isn't just some random field where people decided to have athletic competitions. This is holy ground. This is where the gods themselves are believed to walk among humans. The Valley of Olympia sits at the confluence of 2 rivers, the Alpheus and the Cladios. The Greeks believed this geographical meeting point symbolized the meeting of heaven and earth, the divine and the mortal. Mountains surround the valley, creating a natural amphitheater. Oak trees and olive groves cover the hillsides. The air smells of pine resin, burning incense, and the smoke from countless sacrificial fires. At the heart of Olympia stands the Temple of Zeus, and inside that temple is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a massive statue of Zeus sitting on his throne. This isn't some modest religious icon. This statue is 40 feet tall, covered in gold and ivory. Zeus's skin is ivory, his robes are gold, his throne is decorated with precious stones and ebony. In one hand, he holds a scepter topped with an eagle. In the other, a statue of Nike, the goddess of victory. The sculptor Phidias spent years creating this masterpiece. When people entered the temple and saw Zeus for the first time, they reportedly fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sense of divine presence. This wasn't art for art's sake. This was designed to make you feel the power of the gods, to make you understand that you were standing in the presence of something far greater than yourself. The Olympic Games weren't primarily about athletics. They were religious festivals. The competitions were offerings to Zeus, demonstrations of human excellence presented as worship. Every 4 years, all of Greece would pause, wars, disputes, everything, to celebrate the king of the gods through athletic competition. The myth of how the Olympics began is important because it tells us what the Greeks valued. One version says Heracles, the greatest hero of Greek mythology, founded the Games after completing his 12 labors. He measured out the stadium track by walking heel to toe for 600 feet, establishing the standard Olympic distance. Then he ran that distance without taking a breath, establishing the stadion race as the most prestigious event. Another version says Zeus himself started the Games after defeating his father Cronus in a wrestling match for control of the universe. The Olympics commemorated that cosmic victory, that establishment, divine order. Every athletic contest was a reenactment of that primal struggle between chaos and civilization. A third myth involves Pelops, a hero who won a chariot race through trickery and divine intervention, defeating King Oenomaus to win the king's daughter. The chariot races at Olympia supposedly commemorated that mythical victory. The hippodrome, where chariot races took place, was enormous, about 600 meters long and 200 meters wide. It could hold thousands of spectators. What matters is that all these myths connect the Games to divine origins. The Olympics weren't invented by humans for human purposes. They were gifts from the gods, or established to honor the gods, or founded by demigods. This wasn't entertainment. This was sacred ritual. The religious ceremonies were elaborate and constant throughout the 5-day festival. On the first day, athletes, trainers, and officials would gather before the statue of Zeus Horkios, Zeus the Oathkeeper, and swear sacred oaths. Athletes swore they had trained for 10 months and would compete fairly. Trainers swore they had supervised proper training. Judges swore they would judge impartially and keep secret any confidential information about athletes. Breaking these oaths wasn't just cheating, it was sacrilege, an offense against the gods themselves. The punishments were severe, not just because you broke rules, but because you violated sacred vows made before Zeus himself. Between athletic events, there were constant sacrifices. 100 oxen, a hecatomb, would be sacrificed to Zeus at the great altar. The altar wasn't a small structure. Over centuries of Olympic festivals, it had grown into a mound of ash and burned bones, 22 feet high. Blood from thousands of animals soaked the ground. The smell of burning meat filled the valley. This might seem barbaric to us, but to the Greeks, sacrifice was how you communicated with gods. The smoke carried your prayers to heaven. The gods consumed the smoke and smell, while humans ate the meat. A shared meal between mortals and immortals. After major sacrifices, there would be massive feasts where thousands of people ate sacrificial meat together. The sanctuary at Olympia wasn't just the temple of Zeus. There were temples to other gods. Hera, Zeus's wife, had her own temple. There was an altar to unknown gods, just in case you accidentally offended a deity you didn't know about. There were temples to various heroes and minor deities. The whole valley was thick with sacred significance. The olive trees were sacred too. The victory wreaths given to Olympic champions were made from branches cut from a specific sacred olive tree near Zeus's temple, using a golden sickle wielded by a young boy whose parents were both still living. Everything was ritualized. Everything had symbolic meaning. Athletes would make personal offerings before competing. Small bronze or terracotta figurines of athletes in various poses. Prayer offerings, asking for divine favor. Archaeological excavations have found thousands of these votive offerings buried around the sanctuary. Each one represents an ancient athlete's prayer. Please, Zeus, let me win. Let me bring glory to my city. Let me achieve immortal fame. The Olympics weren't separate from religion. They were religion in action. Athletic excellence was a form of worship. Victory was divine favor made visible. Defeat was the god's judgment. When you competed at Olympia, you weren't just testing yourself against other humans. You were performing before the gods, offering your best to the divine, hoping the immortals would smile upon you. At night, the valley would be lit by thousands of torches and fires. Priests would perform rituals throughout the night. Hymns would be sung. People would camp throughout the sanctuary grounds, thousands and eventually tens of thousands of visitors, living in tents, sleeping under the stars, all gathered to witness these sacred games. The atmosphere must have been incredible. Religious devotion, athletic competition, national pride, personal ambition, all mixed together. The roar of crowds, the smell of incense and sacrificial smoke, the sight of the greatest athletes in Greece competing before the statue of Zeus. This was where the mortal and divine worlds intersected. This was where ordinary humans could achieve something extraordinary, something that would echo through eternity. And every 4 years, for over 1,000 years, this happened. The sanctuary at Olympia became the center of Greek identity, the place where all Greeks, despite their constant wars and rivalries, came together as one people, united by language, religion, and the love of athletic excellence. The Olympics weren't just games. They were proof that despite political divisions, the Greeks were one civilization with shared values and gods. They were a statement that human excellence mattered, that striving for perfection was worth pursuing, that glory was worth any sacrifice. This is where our modern Olympics come from. Not just the athletic competitions, but the idea that sports can unite humanity, that physical achievement deserves celebration, that competition can be noble. Now let me tell you about one of the most remarkable institutions in ancient history, the Olympic Truce, the Ekakeria. Because what made the ancient Olympics truly special wasn't just the athletics. It was that for a few months every 4 years, the Greek world stopped fighting and came together in peace. You have to understand the context. Ancient Greece wasn't one unified nation. It was hundreds of independent city-states, polis, constantly competing, arguing, and frequently fighting each other. Athens versus Sparta, Thebes versus everyone. Corinth, Argos, Syracuse, Thebes. All these cities had their own governments, armies, ambitions, and grudges. Greek history is basically one long series of wars, interrupted by brief periods of exhausted peace. But every 4 years, all of it stopped. The Olympic Truce declared that for a period of 1 to 3 months, it varied over the centuries, all warfare would cease. Not just wars involving Elis, the city-state that controlled Olympia. All warfare, all military action, across the entire Greek world. This wasn't just a nice suggestion. The truce was sacred law, protected by Zeus himself. 3 heralds, called spondophoroi, truce-bearers, would travel throughout the Greek world announcing the upcoming Olympics and the beginning of the truce. These heralds carried ceremonial staffs and wore sacred wreaths. They were inviolable, protected by divine law. To harm a truce-bearer would be an unthinkable sacrilege. The announcement would specify the dates, when the truce began, when athletes and spectators should arrive, when the games would happen, when the truce would end. City-states would post the announcements publicly. Everyone knew that during this period, warfare was forbidden. What did the truce actually prohibit? No military operations, no invasions, no raids, no battles, no bearing arms into the sanctuary of Olympia. You came unarmed, or you didn't come. No legal prosecution of athletes or spectators traveling to or from the games. Your disputes would wait. Safe passage was guaranteed for everyone traveling to Olympia, regardless of their city's political situation. This created situations that seem impossible to modern minds. Imagine Athens and Sparta are at war, which happened frequently. During the Olympic Truce, Athenian and Spartan athletes would travel to Olympia, compete against each other in the stadium, and then travel home safely. Soldiers who had been killing each other months ago would wrestle or race, then go back to killing each other after the games ended. The truce didn't end wars, it paused them. Armies would stop advancing, retreat to defensive positions, and wait. Generals would plan their campaigns around the Olympic schedule. You didn't want to be in the middle of a major offensive when the Olympic Truce began, because your soldiers would want to attend the games, and if you violated the truce, you'd face serious consequences. What consequences? Any city-state that violated the Olympic Truce would be fined heavily. They would be excluded from the games. Their athletes couldn't compete. Their citizens couldn't attend as spectators. This was devastating, because Olympic victory brought enormous prestige. No city wanted to be banned from the Olympics. There are historical records of violations being punished. In 420 BC, Sparta was fined 2 minae, a substantial sum, for allegedly conducting military operations during the Olympic Truce. Sparta refused to pay, so they were banned from the games. Spartan athletes were prohibited from competing. This was a huge embarrassment for a city that prided itself on military and athletic prowess. The interesting thing is that the truce worked more often than it failed. For over 1,000 years, Olympics happened every 4 years with remarkable regularity. Wars paused, Athletes competed, then wars resumed. The Olympics were that important to Greek identity that even bitter enemies respected the truce. Why? Partly religion. Violating the Olympic truce was offending Zeus, and nobody wanted divine wrath. Partly culture. The Olympics were bigger than any individual war. They represented something all Greeks shared, a common heritage more important than current political disputes. And partly practical. If you violated the truce, you'd be excluded from future games, losing prestige and the opportunity for your athletes to win glory. The journey to Olympia could take weeks from distant parts of the Greek world. Athletes from Sicily, southern Italy, Asia Minor, the Black Sea colonies, all traveling hundreds of miles over land and sea. The truce had to last long enough for these distant athletes to travel safely to Olympia, compete, and return home. Imagine you're an athlete from Syracuse in Sicily. You board a ship, sail across the Ionian Sea to mainland Greece, then travel overland through territories controlled by various city-states, some of which might be at war with each other or with Syracuse. Under normal circumstances, this journey would be incredibly dangerous. But during the Olympic truce, you travel safely. Rival soldiers see you but don't attack. Bandits avoid you because harming someone traveling to the Olympics would bring divine punishment. The roads to Olympia would be crowded with travelers. Athletes, trainers, their family members, spectators, vendors, prostitutes, philosophers, poets, anyone who could make the journey. It became a massive pilgrimage, thousands of people converging on one small valley in western Greece. The truce also applied within the sanctuary itself. Olympia was neutral territory. You couldn't settle disputes violently there. If you had a grudge against someone, too bad. Violence in the sacred precinct would result in immediate expulsion and possibly execution. The sanctuary of Zeus had to remain peaceful. This created a unique social space. Political enemies could meet and talk at Olympia without violence. Diplomats used the games as opportunities for negotiations. Treaties were sometimes announced at the Olympics because you had representatives from all Greek city-states gathered in one place. The games became a kind of ancient United Nations, a forum where Greeks could interact peacefully despite their political differences. The Olympic truce also had an ideological dimension. It reinforced the idea that there was something called being Greek that transcended political boundaries. Athens and Sparta might hate each other, but they were both Greek. They shared language, gods, culture, and the Olympics. The truce was a yearly reminder that unity was possible, that Greeks could put aside their differences, at least temporarily. Some historians argue that the Olympic truce helped prevent the complete fragmentation of Greek civilization. Without these regular gatherings where Greeks met peacefully, where shared identity was reinforced, the Greek world might have splintered completely into isolated, hostile city-states. The Olympics helped maintain cultural cohesion despite political division. Of course, the truce had limits. It didn't create lasting peace. Wars resumed after the games ended. The same soldiers who competed together would soon fight against each other. But for a few months every 4 years, peace was possible. Violence could be channeled into athletic competition rather than warfare. Enemies could coexist. The Olympic truce is one of the most idealistic institutions in ancient history. The belief that something, religion, athletics, culture, could be more important than war, more important than political disputes, more important than revenge and ambition. For a few months, the Greeks chose glory over conquest, individual athletic achievement over collective military victory. When Baron Pierre de Coubertin revived the Olympics in 1896, he was inspired partly by the ancient Olympic Truce. The modern Olympics maintain this ideal, the hope that sports can promote peace, that athletes from hostile nations can compete peacefully, that shared humanity matters more than political differences. The ancient Olympic truce was never perfect. Violations happened. Wars influenced who could attend. Political tensions affected competitions. But for over a millennium, it worked more often than it failed. Every 4 years, the Greek world paused its endless conflicts and gathered to celebrate human excellence under the watchful eyes of the gods. That's remarkable. That's worth remembering. In a world of constant warfare, the Greeks created an institution of peace, protected by religion and sustained by shared cultural values. The Olympic truce shows that even in brutal ancient times, people understood that some things should transcend violence, that peace, even temporary peace, was worth pursuing. Becoming an Olympic athlete in ancient Greece wasn't something you decided to do on a whim. This was a lifetime commitment that required absolute dedication, brutal training, and personal sacrifice that would make modern Olympic athletes look at you with respect and possibly horror. First, let's talk about who could compete. The rules were strict and exclusionary by modern standards. You had to be male. You had to be free-born, no slaves, no freedmen. You had to be Greek. You spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods, came from a Greek city. These weren't just administrative rules, they were religious requirements. The Olympics were sacred to Zeus, and only those deemed worthy by Greek cultural standards could participate in his holy festival. Women had it even worse. Married women were forbidden from even attending the Olympics as spectators, on pain of death. That's not metaphorical. The penalty for a married woman caught watching the games was to be thrown off a nearby cliff. Only unmarried girls and priestesses of certain goddesses were allowed to watch. Why such harsh restrictions? The Olympics were deeply connected to masculine Greek ideals. The nude male body in peak athletic condition was considered the highest form of beauty, a reflection of divine perfection. This was a celebration of male excellence, and women, particularly married women, were considered inappropriate witnesses to this sacred display. However, women did have their own athletic competitions, the Heraean Games, held in Olympia in honor of Hera, Zeus's wife. These games featured foot races for unmarried girls, divided into 3 age categories. The winners received olive crowns and portions of a cow sacrificed to Hera. It wasn't the Olympics, but it shows that female athletic achievement had some recognition in ancient Greece. But back to the men. If you wanted to compete in the Olympics, you had to prove you'd trained for at least 10 months. Not casual training, serious, supervised, daily training. For the final month before the Games, you had to train at Olympia itself, under the supervision of the Hellanodikai, the Olympic judges, who would assess whether you were truly prepared. The training was brutal. Athletes would wake before dawn and train until exhaustion, running on sand to build leg strength, wrestling in the palestra, the wrestling school, for hours, lifting heavy stones to build muscle, practicing combat techniques until every movement was instinctive. Diet was crucial and evolved over the centuries. Early Greek athletes ate mostly cheese, dried figs, and porridge. Then someone discovered that eating large amounts of meat built muscle mass and strength. Athletes started consuming enormous quantities of meat: beef, pork, lamb, far more than ordinary Greeks could afford. A successful athlete might eat 10 to 20 pounds of meat daily, a diet impossible for anyone but the wealthy or those with wealthy sponsors. This meat-heavy diet was revolutionary for its time. Most Greeks ate grain, vegetables, fish, cheese, and small amounts of meat. Athletes were eating like carnivorous warriors, fueling their bodies for maximum performance. Trainers developed specific diets for different events. Distance runners ate lighter. Wrestlers and combat sport athletes ate more protein and fat. The training regime was also event-specific. Sprinters practiced explosive starts and maximum speed over short distances. Long-distance runners built endurance through endless miles. Wrestlers practiced holds, throws, and ground techniques. Boxers hardened their hands and faces through repeated impact. Pankration fighters, competitors in the brutal mixed martial arts event, trained in both striking and grappling, learning to inflict maximum damage while protecting themselves. Physical conditioning wasn't enough. Athletes also trained their minds. Mental toughness was considered as important as physical strength. Trainers used various psychological techniques: visualization, meditation, even pain tolerance training, where athletes learned to ignore injury and exhaustion. Injuries were common and brutal. No medical science as we understand it. Broken bones were set without anesthesia. Dislocations popped back into place. Cuts were cauterized with hot iron. Athletes competed through pain that would send modern athletes to the hospital. This wasn't foolishness. This was the price of glory. The culture of nudity, competing completely naked, served multiple purposes. Practically, clothes would restrict movement. Culturally, nudity was associated with heroism and divine favor. The Greek word for gymnasium, gymnasion, literally means place to train naked. Aesthetically, the nude male athlete represented the ideal of kalokagathia, beautiful and good, physical perfection reflecting moral virtue. Before competing, athletes would oil their bodies with olive oil. This served multiple functions. It protected skin from the sun, highlighted muscle definition for judges and spectators, and in combat sports, it made you slippery and harder to grab. After training or competition, athletes would scrape off the oil, sweat, and dirt with a curved metal tool called a strigil, the ancient equivalent of showering. Training facilities were social spaces too. Young men from wealthy families would gather to train, socialize, and learn. Philosophers like Socrates and Plato frequented gymnasiums, teaching and debating while athletes trained. The gymnasium was where physical and intellectual excellence met, where body and mind were cultivated together. But training was also isolating. Serious athletes sacrificed normal social life. While their peers were partying, they were training. While others were building careers or families, they were pursuing Olympic glory. The window for peak athletic performance was short, maybe ages 20 to 30 for most events. Everything had to be sacrificed for those few years when Olympic victory was possible. The financial burden was substantial. Training full-time meant not working. Meat diet was expensive. Travel to Olympia cost money. Only wealthy families could afford to support an athlete, or athletes needed wealthy sponsors, patrons who would fund training in exchange for reflected glory if the athlete won. This created a class dimension to Olympic competition. Combat sports and running events were more accessible. You needed physical talent but less money. Equestrian events, chariot racing and horseback riding,
were exclusively for the super rich. Only the wealthiest families could afford to breed, train, and maintain racing horses. Chariot racing was where the elite displayed their wealth as much as their competitive spirit. The psychological pressure was immense. Imagine training your entire life for one event, one chance at Olympic glory. 4 years between Olympics. If you peak between Olympic years, too bad, you wait. If you're injured during
Olympic year, too bad, you wait 4 more years. One mistake, one bad day, and your dreams are over. And failure wasn't just personal disappointment. Your entire city was watching. Olympic victory brought glory to your hometown. Statues would be erected, poems written, celebrations held. But failure? You'd be mocked. Your city would be disappointed. The shame could be crushing. Some athletes reportedly went into exile rather than return home after losing. The oath taken before Zeus added divine dimensions to the pressure. You swore to train properly and compete fairly. Breaking this oath was sacrilege. Cheating wasn't just rule-breaking, it was offending the king of the gods. The religious dimension made athletic competition a moral test, not just a physical one. Despite all this, the brutal training, the sacrifice, the pressure, the risk, athletes pursued Olympic glory with fierce dedication. Why? Because Olympic victory offered something transcendent. Immortality through fame. Your name would be remembered forever. Poets would celebrate you. Your city would honor you. You would become more than human. You would become legendary. The greatest Olympic athletes achieved exactly that. Names like Leonidas of Rhodes, who won 12 Olympic crowns across 4 consecutive Olympics. Milo of Croton, the legendary wrestler. Diagoras of Rhodes, whose family dominated boxing for generations. These men became heroes, their achievements remembered for millennia. That's what motivated ancient Olympic athletes. Not money. There were no cash prizes at the ancient Olympics. Not endorsement deals or professional careers. Just glory. Just the chance to achieve something eternal, to have your name echoed through the ages. And they were willing to sacrifice everything for that chance. Let's talk about the stadion, the 192-meter sprint that was the most prestigious event in the ancient Olympics, the race that gave winners immortality. Because this wasn't just another running event. This was the race. Winning the stadion meant your name would define the entire 4-year Olympiad. History would remember you forever. The distance, 192 meters, was supposedly measured by Heracles himself, who paced it out heel to toe 600 times. That's one stade, the Greek unit of measurement. Every Olympic stadium in Greece was built to this standard length. The track at Olympia was straight, running east to west, so the rising sun would be behind runners at their backs, not in their eyes. The surface was sand, not packed clay or grass, loose sand that shifted under your feet, making every stride harder. Your feet would sink slightly with each step, requiring more power, more strength, more explosive force. This wasn't about smooth running technique. This was about raw power and speed. Imagine standing at the starting line, you and maybe 20 other competitors, the greatest sprinters from across the Greek world. The starting mechanism was a system of gates called hisplex. Ropes held, taut across each lane, would drop simultaneously when the starter signaled, ensuring a fair start. False starts were punished harshly. Judges would whip you with rods. Nobody false started twice. The crowd around you is massive. Eventually, the stadium at Olympia could hold 40,000 spectators. They're packed into earthen banks on both sides of the track, standing or sitting on the ground. The noise is deafening. Every single person is watching you. Your city's hopes rest on your shoulders. The honor of your family depends on your performance. You're completely naked, skin oiled until it gleams in the sunlight. Your muscles are defined from months of brutal training. Your heart is pounding. You've trained your entire life for the next 20 seconds. Everything depends on what happens when those gates drop. The starter, a herald, raises his hand. The crowd quiets. For a moment, there's perfect silence. 40,000 people holding their breath. Then the gates drop. The rope falls away, and you explode forward. The first few strides are crucial. You need maximum explosive power, driving your legs into the sand, pumping your arms, every muscle firing at once. The sand shifts under your feet, trying to slow you down. You have to power through it, maintaining speed despite the resistant surface. The crowd erupts. 40,000 voices screaming, your city's name being chanted, or your opponent's city. The noise is overwhelming, a physical force pushing against you. You can't hear anything else. You're running in a tunnel of sound. Halfway through the race, about 100 meters, your legs are burning. The sand has sapped your speed. Your lungs are screaming for air. This is where mental toughness matters. Physical strength brought you here, but willpower will carry you to the finish. You dig deeper, finding reserves you didn't know you had. The finish line appears. You're neck and neck with other runners. Everyone is exhausted. Everyone is at their limit. Whoever wants it more, whoever trained harder, whoever is willing to push through more pain, they will win. You throw your chest forward, arms pumping, legs driving through the sand one last time. You cross the finish line. Did you win? You can't tell. Everything happened so fast. You're bent over, gasping for breath, legs trembling. The sand is churned up from 20 pairs of feet, driving through it at maximum speed. The crowd's noise tells you nothing. Everyone is screaming. The judges confer. They were watching from the sidelines, their experienced eyes tracking the finish. One of them points at you. You won. You are the Olympic victor in the stadion. What happens next is one of the most important moments in your life. The herald announces your name, your father's name, and your city. The victor in the stadion race is your name, son of your father, of your city. Your city erupts in celebration. Your father's name is now immortal. Your city's honor is secured. But more importantly, the 4-year period until the next Olympics will be named after you. The Olympiad when your name won the stadion. Every historical event for the next 4 years will be dated according to your victory. Ancient Greek historians used Olympic victories as their dating system. Your name becomes part of the historical record forever. The prize is simple: an olive wreath cut from the sacred tree near Zeus's temple. That's it. No gold medal, no money, no trophy. Just a simple wreath of olive leaves. But that wreath is worth more than gold. It represents divine favor, Olympic glory, immortal fame. Later, during the victory ceremony, you'll be crowned with the olive wreath before the temple of Zeus. Poets will already be composing victory odes in your honor. Your city will plan celebrations. You'll be paraded through the streets, feasted like a hero, possibly given a lifetime pension. Statues might be erected. Your name will be carved into victor lists that will last for centuries. Some stadion victors became legendary. Leonidas of Rhodes won the stadion at 4 consecutive Olympics, 12 total victories when you count other races. His record stood for centuries until it was broken in 2016 by Michael Phelps, and Leonidas's record was for individual races, not total medals. Polites of Keramos won the stadion, Diaulos, 2-stage race, and Hoplitodromos, race in armor, at the same Olympics, a stunning achievement requiring both speed and endurance. But the stadion was more than athletic achievement. It represented Greek ideals of arete, excellence, virtue, being the best. The fastest runner was fulfilling human potential, demonstrating what mortals could achieve when they pushed themselves to the limit. This was philosophy made physical, ethics demonstrated through action. The race also had practical origins. Greek warfare relied on hoplites, heavily armored infantry who fought in close formation. The ability to sprint quickly was crucial in battle, closing with the enemy, pursuing fleeing foes, retreating when necessary. The stadion demonstrated combat-relevant fitness. That's why there was also the Hoplitodromos, a race where competitors wore helmets, greaves, shin guards, and carried shields. Running 192 meters, carrying 30 to 40 pounds of bronze equipment, tested whether you had the strength and endurance for real warfare. It was athletic competition with clear military applications. The Diaulos, the 2-stage race, 384 meters, required both speed and endurance. Runners had to pace themselves, conserve energy for the second lap, while maintaining competitive speed. The strategy was more complex than the pure sprint of the stadion. The Dolichos was the long-distance race, 20 or 24 stardates, around 4,600 meters. This tested pure endurance. Runners would lap the stadium multiple times, while the crowd chanted encouragement. Winning the Dolichos required different training, building cardiovascular endurance rather than explosive speed. These were the marathoners of the ancient world. But the stadion remained the most prestigious. Why? Partly tradition. It was the original Olympic event. Partly aesthetics. The pure sprint was the most visually spectacular race, the most dramatic, the most intense. And partly symbolic. It represented pure speed, pure athletic ability, stripped to its essence. The stadion sprint embodies everything the ancient Olympics represented: individual excellence, physical perfection, mental toughness, glory before the gods, competition at the highest level, the willingness to sacrifice everything for a moment of transcendent achievement. When those gates dropped and runners exploded forward, they weren't just racing each other. They were racing toward immortality. 20 seconds of maximum effort for eternal fame. That's the stadion. That's what made Olympic victory worth any sacrifice. Now, let's talk about the combat sports at the ancient Olympics, because this is where things got brutal. Wrestling, boxing, and pankration. These weren't genteel athletic competitions. These were fights. Real fights. People got seriously injured. Some died. And the Greeks loved it. Wrestling, pale, was one of the original Olympic events and considered the most noble combat sport. It tested strength, technique, and intelligence simultaneously. The goal was simple: throw your opponent to the ground 3 times. A throw was counted when back, shoulders, or hips touched the ground. The wrestler still standing was the victor. But simple rules don't mean simple competition. Greek wrestling was incredibly sophisticated. Wrestlers trained in hundreds of holds, throws, and counter techniques. There were moves called the ladder, the waist hold, the flying mare, techniques with names that have survived 2,500 years. Matches took place in the palestra, the wrestling school, in an area called the scama, a pit of soft sand. The sand was moistened and worked until it had the right consistency, firm enough to provide footing, soft enough to cushion falls. Wrestlers were covered in olive oil, making them slippery, harder to grip. This meant technique was even more important than strength. There was no time limit. Matches continued until someone won 3 throws or submitted. This could take minutes or hours. Endurance mattered as much as skill. You had to maintain strength and focus throughout, never making a careless mistake that could cost you the match. The psychological warfare was intense. Wrestlers would try to intimidate opponents, trash talk, demonstrate their strength. But once the match began, it was all about technique and will. The crowd would be screaming advice, encouragement, insults. You had to block it all out and focus solely on your opponent. Famous wrestlers became legendary. Milo of Croton won the wrestling competition at 6 consecutive Olympics over 24 years, an almost unbelievable achievement. Stories about Milo became mythical. They said he could carry a full-grown bull on his shoulders, that he would train by lifting a calf daily, and as the calf grew into a bull, so did his strength. But wrestling was the genteel combat sport. Boxing, pygmy, was far more brutal. Greek boxing wasn't like modern boxing. There were no rounds, no weight classes, no referee stopping the fight when someone was hurt. You fought until someone won. Period. And winning meant your opponent either submitted, was knocked unconscious, or couldn't continue. Fighters wrapped their hands with leather straps called himantes. Early versions were soft leather that protected hands and faces. Later versions became harder, reinforced with metal studs or rings, essentially brass knuckles. These later versions, called sharp thongs, could cause horrific injuries. There was no ring, no ropes. Fighters stood in an open space and exchanged blows. No grappling, no wrestling. This was pure striking. Punches to the head, face, body. The goal was to batter your opponent into submission or unconsciousness. Defensive techniques were limited. No ducking or weaving. That was considered cowardly. You stood your ground and took punches while looking for openings to counter. Blocking with your arms and hands was acceptable, but the general philosophy was that real men absorbed punishment and kept fighting. Fights could last hours. Both fighters would be exhausted, faces pulped, hands broken, bodies bruised and bleeding. The crowd would be screaming for blood, for knockout, for someone to finish it. And still the fighters would continue, driven by pride, by the shame of surrender, by the glory of Olympic victory. Serious injuries were common. Broken noses, shattered teeth, fractured skulls, permanently damaged eyes. Some boxers would suffer repeated head trauma throughout their careers, leading to brain damage. Ancient sources describe boxers with cauliflower ears, scarred faces, and slurred speech, the walking wounded of the combat sports world. But if wrestling was noble and boxing was brutal, pankration was insane. Pankration, meaning all powers, was mixed martial arts before MMA existed. Everything was allowed except biting and gouging eyes. Punches, kicks, elbows, knees, throws, joint locks, chokes, any technique was legal. This was as close to real combat as you could get without weapons. Pankration fighters trained in both striking and grappling. You needed a wrestler's knowledge of holds and throws combined with a boxer's punching power and striking technique. The best pankration fighters were complete martial artists, dangerous from any position, in any situation. Matches started standing. Fighters would exchange strikes, looking for openings. Once someone secured a hold or threw their opponent, the fight would go to the ground. Ground fighting in pankration was vicious. Fighters would apply joint locks trying to break arms or legs, chokes trying to render opponents unconscious. The only way to win was submission or death. Yes, death. Fighters who refused to submit could be choked unconscious or have limbs broken. Some never woke up. Some died from injuries sustained during the match. Olympic records document deaths in pankration competitions. The most famous pankration story is about Eurytion, or Arakion, of Phigaleia. During his third Olympic victory attempt, his opponent had him in a chokehold. Eurytion was losing consciousness. In desperation, he grabbed his opponent's ankle and broke it with a violent twist. The pain was so intense that his opponent submitted by raising his hand, the signal of surrender. At that exact moment, Eurytion died from the chokehold. The judges declared Eurytion the winner. He was crowned Olympic champion posthumously, and a statue was erected in his honor. He had achieved the ultimate victory, winning even in death, demonstrating that glory mattered more than survival. This wasn't unusual in pankration. The sport attracted the toughest, most fearless athletes. Men who would rather die than submit, who viewed surrender as worse than death. The crowds loved it. The violence, the drama, the courage. Why did the Greeks celebrate such brutal sports? Partly it was cultural. Greek society was warrior-based, and combat sports prepared men for war. Partly it was religious. Athletic competition was offering to the gods, and the intensity of combat sports made them especially valuable offerings. Partly it was entertainment. Humans have always been drawn to gladiatorial violence. But there was also philosophy in the violence. Combat sports tested arete, virtue, excellence, courage. Could you endure pain? Could you fight through exhaustion? Could you maintain honor even in brutal circumstances? Combat sports revealed character, showed what a man was truly made of. The respect between fighters was also real. After brutal matches, combatants would embrace, acknowledging each other's courage. They had pushed each other to the limit, tested each other's will, and both had demonstrated the qualities Greeks admired most: strength, courage, skill, endurance, honor. Winners in combat sports became heroes. Dioxippus, a pankration champion, was so feared that opponents would withdraw rather than face him. Melanchomus, a boxer, was famous for defeating opponents without hitting them. His defensive technique was so perfect that opponents would exhaust themselves trying to land punches until they collapsed. The Olympic combat sports weren't civilized by modern standards. They were brutal, dangerous, sometimes fatal. But they represented something Greeks valued deeply: the willingness to face violence with courage, to test yourself against the best, to risk everything for glory, to demonstrate that you were worthy of standing before the gods. Let's talk about the equestrian events at the ancient Olympics, because this is where Greek society's class divisions became obvious. If running and combat sports were for dedicated athletes from various backgrounds, chariot racing was exclusively for the super rich. This was the sport of kings, tyrants, and wealthy aristocrats, the ancient equivalent of Formula One racing. The hippodrome at Olympia was massive, roughly 600 meters long and 200 meters wide. It didn't survive to modern times. Centuries of flooding from the Alpheus River washed it away. But ancient descriptions tell us it was an impressive structure with grandstands for thousands of spectators. Chariot races came in two varieties: the Tethrypon, 4-horse chariot race, and the Sonorous, 2-horse chariot race. The Tethrypon was more prestigious and far more dangerous. 4 horses yoked together, pulling a light, 2-wheeled chariot around the hippodrome for 12 laps, about 14 kilometers total. The speed, the turns, the other chariots, everything conspired to create crashes. Here's something crucial to understand. In Olympic chariot racing, the owner of the horses won the victory, not the driver. Wealthy owners would hire professional chariot drivers, skilled athletes who risked their lives. But if the chariot won, the owner got the Olympic crown, the glory, the victory announcement. The driver got paid wages. This created a situation where wealthy individuals who never left the spectator stands could become Olympic champions. They bred horses, paid for training, hired drivers, and if everything went right, they'd be crowned Olympic victors while someone else did all the actual competing. This wasn't seen as strange or unfair by ancient Greeks. Horse breeding and ownership were marks of aristocratic status. Only the wealthiest families could afford to maintain racing stables. Horses required land for grazing, facilities for training, expert handlers, costly feed. A racing stable was a massive investment that only the elite could afford. Some of the most famous Olympic athletes were actually wealthy owners who never drove chariots themselves. Alcibiades, the famous Athenian general and politician, entered 7 chariots in 1 Olympic Games and won 1st, 2nd, and 4th places. He used this Olympic success as political propaganda, commissioning victory odes and monuments celebrating his triumphs. Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, won Olympic victories in chariot racing. He bragged about these victories extensively, putting chariot racing scenes on coins to publicize his Olympic success. For rulers, Olympic victory in prestigious events like chariot racing enhanced their legitimacy and prestige. Even more remarkable, women could win Olympic victories through horse ownership. They couldn't compete as athletes, couldn't watch the games as married women, but they could own horses. Cynisca, Princess of Sparta, became the first woman to win an Olympic crown by entering her 4-horse chariot team. She won twice, in 396 and 392 BC, and was so proud that she erected a monument at Olympia celebrating her victories. The actual races were spectacular and terrifying. Imagine 12 4-horse chariots, 48 horses total, thundering down the hippodrome. The starting mechanism released them simultaneously, and they'd race toward the first turn. The turns were especially dangerous. Chariots would jostle for position, trying to take the inside lane, forcing opponents wider where they'd have to travel farther. At each turn, there was a stone or wooden post marking the turning point. Chariots had to turn sharply around this post without hitting it or other chariots. This required incredible skill from the driver and perfect training of the horses. The outside horse had to run faster than the inside horse to keep the chariot from flipping or the yoke from breaking. Crashes were common and catastrophic. A chariot would clip another, wheels would tangle, horses would stumble. At racing speed, these crashes could be fatal. Drivers would be thrown, trampled by horses, crushed by chariots. Multiple chariots might crash in a chain reaction, creating a writhing pile of horses, wood, and injured drivers. Ancient sources describe races where more than half the starting chariots crashed. The finish might have only 3 or 4 chariots still racing. Survival was as important as speed. Some drivers focused on consistency and avoiding crashes rather than maintaining maximum speed throughout. The horses themselves were remarkable animals. Greek racing horses were bred for speed, endurance, and the temperament to handle the noise and chaos of racing. Bloodlines were carefully maintained. Famous horses sired champions, and successful racing stables could dominate competitions for generations. Training racehorses was sophisticated. They were conditioned gradually, building strength and speed over months or years. Drivers would practice in training hippodromes, teaching horses to respond to commands, to maintain formation, to handle turns at speed. The bond between driver and horses was crucial. Horses that trusted their driver would perform better under pressure. The noise during races must have been incredible. Thousands of spectators screaming, announcers calling positions, wheels rumbling on hard-packed dirt, horses snorting and hooves pounding, drivers shouting encouragement or curses. It was sensory overload, and only the best-trained horses could maintain focus. There was also mounted horse racing, jockeys riding horses bareback around the hippodrome. This was slightly less elite than chariot racing. You needed 1 horse rather than 2 or 4, but still required wealth most Greeks didn't have. The races were shorter and crashes less catastrophic, but still dangerous. The class dimension of equestrian events created interesting dynamics. Common Greeks couldn't afford to participate, but loved watching. The wealthy saw Olympic equestrian victories as confirmation of their superiority. Their breeding, wealth, and taste demonstrated through successful horses. The events simultaneously unified Greeks. Everyone loved the spectacle, and divided them. Only the elite could participate. Some ancient writers criticized equestrian events as not truly testing individual excellence. The athlete, the driver or jockey, wasn't even the one crowned Olympic victor. The wealthy owner received glory without risking anything personally. This seemed to violate the Olympic ideal of individual athletic achievement. But defenders argued that breeding and training excellent horses required knowledge, skill, and dedication. A successful stable owner had to understand horses, hire good trainers, make smart breeding decisions. This was a different kind of excellence, but excellence nonetheless. The most prestigious Olympic victory possible was winning the Tethrapon, the 4-horse chariot race. Only the wealthiest families could attempt it, and success brought enormous prestige. Your victory would be announced throughout the Greek world. Poets would compose victory odes, statues would be erected. Your family's status would be elevated for generations. The historian Thucydides wrote that Alcibiades argued his Olympic chariot racing victories proved Athens was more powerful than its rivals thought. No weak city could produce such magnificent victors. Olympic success became diplomatic and political capital. The equestrian events showed that the ancient Olympics, despite their ideals of individual excellence and fair competition, reflected Greek society's inequalities. The wealthy had advantages that money could buy: better training, better nutrition, and in equestrian events, the ability to compete by proxy through hired athletes or trained animals. Yet the events were still thrilling. The danger, the speed, the skill required, the spectacle of dozens of horses and chariots racing at maximum speed, crowds loved it. Equestrian events were among the most popular Olympic competitions, drawing the largest crowds and most excitement. Now we come to what many ancient Greeks considered the truest test of athletic excellence, the pentathlon. Not specialization in one event, but balanced achievement across 5 different competitions. The pentathlon identified the most complete athlete, the man who combined speed, strength, skill, and grace in perfect proportion. The 5 events were stadion, sprint, long jump, discus throw, javelin throw, and wrestling. Notice the variety.
running speed, jumping ability, throwing strength and accuracy, combat skill. A pentathlete couldn't just be strong or just be fast. He needed to be good at everything. The scoring system was complex and not entirely clear from surviving sources, but the basic principle was that you competed in each event sequentially, and early victories could make later events irrelevant. If one athlete dominated the first 3 events, the competition might end before the final 2 events. This created strategic dynamics: pace yourself or dominate early and avoid later events. Let's go through each pentathlon event
and understand what it tested. The stadium sprint we've already discussed, pure speed over 192 meters. In the pentathlon context, this tested explosive power and quick twitch muscle response. Pentathletes couldn't train exclusively for sprinting like specialized stadium runners, so they needed natural speed, combined with the endurance to handle 4 more events. The long jump, halma, was perhaps the most distinctive Greek athletic event because of how they did it. Jumpers held weights called halteres, essentially stone or lead dumbbells, usually 2 to 9 pounds each. They would swing these weights forward during the jump to generate momentum, then swing them back before landing to allow the legs to extend further forward. The technique required perfect timing and coordination. Swing the halteres too early or too late, and you'd lose distance or land awkwardly. Master the technique, and you could jump considerably farther than without weights. The world record for ancient long jump is disputed, but some sources claim distances over 50 feet, far beyond modern records. Scholars debate whether this was a single jump or a series of bounds, like a triple jump, but the use of halteres was definitely distinctive to Greek athletics. Jumpers would take a running start, timing their steps precisely, then explode upward and forward at the takeoff line, swinging the halteres forward. At the peak of the jump's arc, they'd swing the weights back, allowing their legs to extend forward for maximum distance. Landing well was crucial. You had to stay upright, not falling backward, or the jump wouldn't count. The long jump tested power, coordination, timing, and grace. A good jump was beautiful to watch. The athletes suspended in midair, weights extended, body perfectly positioned, then landing smoothly in the soft sand of the scummer. It was poetry in motion, athletic achievement as aesthetic performance. The discus throw tested rotational strength and throwing technique. The discus, a bronze disc, typically 17 to 20 inches in diameter and 4 to 9 pounds, had to be thrown for maximum distance from a small throwing area called the balbis. Greek discus technique was different from modern style. Throwers would swing the discus back and forth several times, building momentum, then release it at the optimal moment. Some artistic depictions show throwers winding up with the discus behind them, body twisted, preparing for an explosive release. The throw required strength, timing, and precise technique to maximize distance. Greek vases show beautiful images of discus throwers, bodies perfectly balanced, muscles tensed, faces concentrated. The famous statue, Discobolus by Myron, captures the moment before release, the athlete frozen in perfect balance between potential and kinetic energy. This statue became one of the most iconic images of Greek athletics, symbolizing the beauty of human movement. The javelin throw tested accuracy as much as distance. The javelin, a wooden shaft about 6 feet long, had a leather thong wrapped around it near the center of gravity. The thrower would insert fingers through the thong, throw, and the thong would create spin, stabilizing the javelin's flight like rifling in a gun barrel. Different pentathlon versions emphasized different aspects. Some sources suggest the javelin was thrown for distance, others for accuracy at a target. Either way, it tested arm strength, throwing technique, and fine motor control. A good javelin thrower could hit a target at considerable distance, or achieve maximum distance with perfect technique. The javelin throw also had military applications. Greeks threw javelins in warfare, either hand-thrown or using an atlatl-like throwing stick. Olympic training in javelin throwing directly translated to battlefield skills. This made the pentathlon particularly respected. It tested athleticism with clear practical value. The final event was wrestling, if the competition went that far. We've already discussed Greek wrestling in detail. In the pentathlon context, wrestling was the ultimate test. After 4 exhausting events, could you still summon the strength, technique, and will to defeat an opponent in hand-to-hand combat? Some athletes would deliberately conserve energy in early events, knowing the pentathlon often came down to wrestling. Others would try to dominate early and avoid wrestling entirely. The strategic calculations were complex. The pentathlon tested something beyond physical ability. It tested versatility and balance. Greek philosophy valued moderation and proportion. The pentathlete embodied these values athletically. Not an extreme specialist, but a balanced athlete who could excel across multiple disciplines. This reflected Greek ideals of kalokagathia, beauty and goodness combined. The pentathlete's body would be proportionate and graceful, not overdeveloped in one area like a specialized athlete. A wrestler might be massive and bulky, a distance runner might be lean and wiry, but a pentathlete should look like the ideal human form, balanced, proportionate, beautiful. Famous pentathletes were celebrated as the most complete athletes. To win the Olympic pentathlon meant you were the best all-round athlete in the Greek world. You combined speed, power, skill, and combat ability. You were the closest thing to a perfect athlete. The pentathlon also tested mental qualities, versatility of mind, ability to switch between different physical and mental states, strategic thinking about pacing and energy conservation. You couldn't just turn off your brain and rely on physical dominance. You had to think, adapt, strategize. Some of the most famous Greek athletes were pentathletes. These men became cultural heroes, embodying Greek ideals of balanced excellence. Their achievements inspired sculptors, poets, and philosophers. The pentathlon winner represented what humanity could achieve, not narrow specialization, but broad excellence across multiple domains. This broader ideal of excellence extended beyond athletics. Greek education aimed to develop balanced individuals, physically fit, intellectually capable, artistically sensitive, morally virtuous. The pentathlete was the athletic manifestation of this educational ideal. Excellence wasn't about being best at one thing. It was about being good at everything that mattered. The pentathlon reminds us that the ancient Olympics were about more than athletic records. They were about human excellence in all its dimensions, about demonstrating that mortals could achieve something approaching divine perfection through dedication, training, and natural ability. When a pentathlete stood victorious after succeeding in all 5 events, speed, jumping, throwing twice, and wrestling, he represented the Greek ideal of human achievement. Balanced, strong, skillful, beautiful, victorious. This was arete made manifest. This was what the Olympics celebrated. The ancient Olympics weren't just about athletics. They were deeply political, involved complex gender dynamics, and generated controversies that tell us as much about Greek society as the competitions themselves. Let's dive into the complicated realities behind the Olympic ideal. First, the women's situation.
married women were forbidden from even attending the Olympics on pain of death, specifically being thrown off Mount Typeum, a nearby cliff. The official reason was religious purity. The games were sacred to Zeus, and female presence would pollute the sacred space. The real reason was probably more complex, involving Greek attitudes toward women, sexuality, and appropriate gender roles. Only unmarried girls and priestesses of Demeter, goddess of agriculture, could attend. Demeter's priestess had a special seat of honor at the stadium, recognizing her goddess's importance. But ordinary married women faced the death penalty if caught attending. This actually happened at least once in recorded history. Calliopetra, or Calliopetra, disguised herself as a trainer to watch her son compete. When her son won, she jumped over the barrier in excitement, and her disguise fell apart. She was discovered to be a woman. However, the judges decided not to execute her because her father, brothers, and son were all Olympic victors. But after this incident, they changed the rules. Trainers also had to be naked at the games, preventing future female infiltration. The death penalty for watching sports seems extreme to modern minds, but it reflects Greek gender ideology. The Olympics celebrated nude male bodies in competition. Greeks considered the athletic male form the highest beauty, representing divine perfection. Female presence would somehow corrupt or diminish this, introducing sexuality into sacred space. Yet women did have athletic competitions. The Heraean Games, held at Olympia in honor of Hera, Zeus's wife. These games featured foot races for unmarried girls in 3 age categories.
Winners received olive crowns and portions of a cow sacrificed to Hera. The races were shorter than men's. The track was reduced by 1/6. Girls competed with hair loose, wearing knee-length chitons, tunics, with the right breast exposed. A distinctive style, perhaps imitating Amazons, the legendary warrior women. This exposed breast style appears in ancient art depicting athletic women and might have symbolized their temporary adoption of masculine athletic qualities. The Heraean Games were significant, but not equal to the Olympics. They happened less frequently, featured fewer events, and generated far less prestige. Still, they show that Greek women did engage in athletic competition, and female athletic achievement was considered worthy of honoring gods. Sparta was different from other Greek cities regarding female athletics. Spartan girls trained in running, wrestling, and javelin throwing alongside boys. The Spartans believed physically fit mothers produced stronger children, making female athletics patriotic duty. Spartan women competed in their own games and were famous throughout Greece for their athleticism and beauty. Even in the regular Olympics, women could win victories through horse ownership, as we discussed with Cynisca. This loophole allowed wealthy women to achieve Olympic glory while the prohibition on attendance remained. It's a fascinating contradiction. You can own the horses that win Olympic crowns, but you can't watch the race. Politics permeated the Olympics. City-states used Olympic success as propaganda, proof of their superiority. When Athens was at its height, Athenian athletes dominated many events. When Sparta controlled Greece, Spartans won frequently. Coincidence? Probably not. States that could afford better training facilities, full-time athletes, and expert coaches produced more winners. Olympic victories were used diplomatically. Cities would commission expensive victory odes from famous poets like Pindar, who would compose elaborate poems celebrating Olympic champions,
and, by extension, their cities. These odes were performed publicly, spreading news of Olympic triumphs and enhancing civic pride. Tyrants and kings especially loved Olympic victories. Hero I, tyrant of Syracuse, won multiple equestrian victories and commissioned victory odes that are masterpieces of Greek literature. These odes compared Hero to heroes and gods, using Olympic success to legitimize his political power. Olympic truces could be politically motivated. The sacred truce protected travelers to Olympia, but it also forced warring cities to pause conflicts, creating opportunities for diplomacy. Many important treaties were negotiated at Olympic Games because representatives from all Greek city-states were present. The Olympics functioned as a kind of United Nations summit, facilitating communication among otherwise hostile states. Cheating was always a problem, and punishments were severe. Caught bribing opponents, judges, tampering with competitions, you'd pay enormous fines. The money was used to erect bronze statues called zanes, statues of Zeus, along the entrance path to the stadium. Each zane had an inscription identifying the cheater and their offense. Future athletes would walk past these monuments to shame, reminded that cheating disgraced not just yourself, but your entire city, and offended Zeus himself. Some recorded cheating cases. Eupolis of Thessaly bribed 3 opponents to throw their boxing matches in 388 BC. All 4 were fined, and 6 zanes were erected. Callippus of Athens bribed opponents in the pentathlon in 332 BC. The Athenians initially refused to pay the fine, boycotting the next Olympics until they finally paid. These incidents show that even severe penalties couldn't eliminate cheating entirely. There were also political conflicts at the Games themselves. In 420 BC, Sparta was banned from the Olympics for violating the Olympic Truce. They claimed they hadn't violated the truce, but the judges disagreed. Spartan athletes were prohibited from competing, a massive humiliation for a state that prided itself on military and athletic prowess. One Spartan, Lycus, circumvented the ban by entering his chariot under Theban colors. When his chariot won, Lycus rushed onto the track to crown his charioteer, revealing the team was actually Spartan. Officials beat him with rods for violating the ban, but the victory stood, credited to Thebes, not Sparta. This incident shows how politically charged Olympic competitions could become. Prize money was another controversy. The ancient Olympics awarded no cash prizes, only olive crowns. But victors' home cities often rewarded them lavishly. Athens gave Olympic victors 500 drachmas, about a year's wages for a skilled worker. Victors might receive lifetime pensions, free meals in public buildings, front-row seats at festivals, and exemption from taxes. This created a semi-professional athlete class. Men would train full-time because Olympic victory guaranteed financial security. Critics argued this contradicted amateur ideals. Athletes should compete for glory, not money. But the cities providing rewards argued they were honoring excellence, not creating professionals. The class dimension was always present. Wealthy citizens could afford full-time training, proper nutrition, expert coaches. Poorer Greeks had to work for living and couldn't dedicate themselves to athletics. This meant the Olympics, despite claiming to test pure individual merit, actually favored the wealthy. Some events were explicitly elite. Chariot racing required owning expensive horses. Pankration and boxing could be more democratic. You needed physical ability, not wealth. But even there, proper training required time and resources. The Olympics celebrated individual excellence,
while operating within social structures that made such excellence easier for some than others. There were also regional biases. Judges, Hellenodikai, came from Elis, the city-state controlling Olympia. Were they always impartial? Probably not. Accusations of biased judging appear in historical sources, though direct evidence is limited. Any judging system involving humans involves potential bias, and Greeks from other cities sometimes suspected Elean judges favored local athletes. The Olympics also excluded non-Greeks entirely. Barbarians, anyone who didn't speak Greek, couldn't compete. This wasn't just cultural preference, it was religious requirement. The Olympics honored Greek gods and celebrated Greek identity. Non-Greeks worshipped different gods, held different values, didn't share Greek culture. The exclusion helped define who was Greek and who wasn't. Eventually, as Greek culture spread and more people adopted Greek language and customs, Greek became cultural rather than ethnic. During the Roman period, Roman citizens could compete despite not being ethnically Greek because they'd been Hellenized, educated in Greek language, trained in Greek athletics, worshipping Greek gods. The controversies, the politics, the gender exclusions, the cheating, all of these show that the ancient Olympics weren't a pure athletic ideal untainted by messy human realities. They were deeply embedded in Greek society, reflecting its values, prejudices, and power structures. But that doesn't diminish their significance. The ancient Olympics created something remarkable, a pan-Hellenic institution that survived over 1,000 years, that promoted selective peace, that celebrated limited excellence, that brought some Greeks together in common cause. The Olympics were flawed because humans are flawed. But they aspired to something greater, and that aspiration inspired generations. The ancient Olympics lasted over 1,000 years, 293 Olympiads from 776 BC to 393 AD. But all things end, and the Olympics' end tells us as much about changing civilizations as their glory days tell us about Greek culture. Let's talk about how and why the ancient Olympics died. The decline was gradual, spanning centuries. Early signs appeared during the Roman conquest of Greece in the 2nd century BC. Initially, Romans admired Greek culture and respected the Olympics. Some emperors, like Nero, even competed. We'll get to that absurd story. But Roman domination changed the game's character. Under Roman rule, the Olympics became increasingly commercialized and politicized. The amateur ideal eroded. Athletes were no longer competing purely for glory, they were professionals making careers from athletics. Cities would pay athletes to represent them, hire trainers, and provide luxurious lifestyles. The nobility of arete was giving way to monetary calculation. The Romans introduced professional athletic guilds, associations of athletes who would travel to various games across the empire, competing for cash prizes. These weren't just Olympic competitors, they were professional athletes touring the circuit. The Olympics became one stop among many, rather than the supreme competition. Roman emperors used the Olympics for propaganda and personal glory. Nero's participation in 67 AD was particularly farcical. He delayed the games by 2 years to suit his schedule, entered every event, including chariot racing, fell out of his chariot during the race, and was still declared the winner. He also competed in poetry and lyre-playing competitions, events added specifically for him. When he finally left Olympia, he declared he had won 1,808 Olympic crowns. Nobody dared contradict the emperor. This mockery of Olympic ideals, giving victories to an emperor regardless of performance, damaged the game's credibility. If winners were determined by political power rather than athletic merit, what was the point? The religious foundation was eroding too. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, pagan religious festivals became controversial. The Olympics honored Zeus and other Greek gods that Christians considered false idols. Christian leaders argued that athletic competitions glorifying pagan gods were incompatible with Christian faith. The athlete culture was also problematic for Christians. The nudity, the focus on physical rather than spiritual development, the glorification of human bodies, all contradicted Christian values emphasizing modesty, spiritual over physical excellence, and humility rather than pride in achievement. Earthquakes damaged Olympia repeatedly. Major quakes in the 4th and 6th centuries AD destroyed buildings, toppled the great statue of Zeus, and made the sanctuary increasingly difficult to maintain. Without the wealth and will to rebuild, Olympia gradually fell into ruins. The final blow came in 393 AD, when Emperor Theodosius I issued a decree abolishing all pagan festivals throughout the Roman Empire. The Olympics, as a festival honoring pagan gods, were explicitly forbidden. The games that had run for over 1,000 years ended by imperial command. The last recorded Olympic Games occurred in 393 AD, the 293rd Olympiad. Who won? We don't know. The records are lost. The ancient Olympics ended not with celebration, but with a bureaucratic decree from a Christian emperor who considered them pagan abominations. After the ban, Olympia deteriorated rapidly. Without the games bringing visitors, money, and attention, the sanctuary was abandoned. Earthquakes continued to damage buildings. The Alpheus River periodically flooded, depositing layers of mud and silt over the ruins. Looters stole valuable bronze and marble. Christians quarried stone from pagan temples to build churches. The great statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders, was destroyed. Some sources say it was carried to Constantinople and burned in a fire there. Others say it was destroyed by earthquake at Olympia. Either way, one of antiquity's greatest artworks was lost forever. By the Middle Ages, Olympia was completely forgotten. The ruins were buried under 6 to 12 feet soil. The location of the ancient sanctuary was unknown. Local villages sat atop buried temples and stadiums, inhabitants unaware of what lay beneath their feet. The memory of the Olympics survived through Greek and Roman literature. Medieval Europeans knew ancient Greeks had held athletic competitions called the Olympics, but details were vague. The site itself was lost, and the full glory of the ancient games was forgotten. For 1,500 years, Olympia slept beneath the soil. Then, in the 18th century, European travelers visiting Greece started searching for ancient sites. In 1766, Richard Chandler, an English antiquarian, located the ruins of Olympia. Systematic excavation began in the 1870s under German archaeologists. What they found was astonishing. The Temple of Zeus, the stadium, training facilities, votive offerings, victor lists carved in stone. The rediscovery of Olympia inspired the modern Olympic movement. Baron Pierre de Coubertin, a French educator, proposed reviving the Olympics as an international athletic competition promoting peace and understanding among nations. He drew direct inspiration from the ancient games, the olive crowns, the Olympic oath, the sacred truce, the ideal of amateur athletics for glory rather than money. The first modern Olympics were held in Athens in 1896, exactly 1,503 years after the last ancient games. Athletes from 14 nations competed in 43 events. Greece built a new stadium, the Panathenaic Stadium in Athens. A Greek runner, Spiridon Louis, won the marathon. The host nation cheered, seeing it as connection to their ancient glory. The modern Olympics consciously copied ancient elements. The Olympic flame ceremony, where a torch is lit at Olympia and carried to the host city. The opening ceremony's pageantry. The olive wreaths in ancient-style victory ceremonies. The Olympic motto, Citius, Altius, Fortius. Faster, higher, stronger, echoing ancient Greek pursuit of excellence. But the modern Olympics are fundamentally different. Women compete equally. Athletes from all nations and cultures participate. Professional athletes dominate. Corporate sponsorship funds everything. The games move between host cities rather than staying in one sacred location. Politics intrudes constantly. Boycotts, controversies, diplomatic incidents. Yet something of the ancient spirit survives. Athletes still train their entire lives for Olympic glory. Victories still mean national pride and personal immortality. The Olympics still inspire us with displays of human excellence, courage, and achievement. The ideals of fair competition, international cooperation, and pushing human limits, these echo ancient Greek values. The ancient Olympics died because the world changed. The Greek religious framework supporting them collapsed. The Roman Empire adopted Christianity. Political priorities shifted. But the idea that athletic excellence matters, that competition can be noble, that humans should strive for perfection, that idea survived. The ruins of Olympia remain. You can visit them today. Walk the same track ancient athletes ran. Stand in the stadium where 40,000 spectators cheered. See the remains of Zeus's temple, though the great statue is gone. The site is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, protected and preserved for future generations. Every 2 years, Olympic flames are lit at Olympia before modern Olympics. Greek priestesses, dressed in ancient robes, use a parabolic mirror to ignite the flame using sunlight, just as ancient Greeks might have done. The flame is carried by torch relay to wherever the games are held, connecting modern Olympics to their ancient origin. The ancient Olympics are dead, but their legacy lives on in the modern Olympics, in our continued admiration for athletic achievement, in the ideal that sports can unite humanity, in the belief that excellence is worth pursuing. The games ended, but the spirit endures. As we reach the end of our journey through the ancient Olympics, let's reflect on what these games meant, what they teach us, and why they still matter 2,600 years after they began. The ancient Olympics were never just about sports. They were about what it means to be human, about how far we can push ourselves, about glory and sacrifice, and the eternal human desire to be remembered. They were about community, bringing divided Greeks together in common purpose. They were about religion, honoring gods through human excellence. They were about politics, demonstrating power and prestige. They were about art, the beauty of the human body in motion. They were about philosophy, the meaning of arete, virtue, excellence. The Olympics represented Greek values distilled into athletic competition. Individual achievement mattered. You competed for personal glory, and your name would be remembered forever. But community also mattered. You represented your city, and your victory brought honor to your entire polis. Personal excellence and civic pride were intertwined, not contradictory. The ancient Greeks understood something we sometimes forget, that physical excellence is meaningful. Our culture sometimes separates mind and body, valuing intellectual achievement over physical prowess. The Greeks didn't make that distinction. A beautiful, strong, capable body was a work of art, a gift from the gods,
something worth developing and displaying. Kalokagathia, beautiful and good, meant physical and moral excellence were inseparable. The Olympics also taught lessons about competition. Yes, competition was fierce. Athletes trained their entire lives, sacrificed everything, competed brutally for victory. But competition had rules. Cheating was shameful. Religious oaths bound competitors to fair play. Judges enforced standards. The point wasn't victory by any means. It was victory through excellence. The respect between competitors was real. After brutal boxing matches or wrestling contests, athletes would embrace,
acknowledging each other's courage and skill. You could compete fiercely while respecting your opponent. Winning didn't require demeaning the loser. Excellence respected excellence. The Olympic Truce demonstrated that even in conflict, some things transcend politics. Ancient Greeks fought constantly, but every 4 years, wars paused for the Olympics. The Games were more important than any individual conflict. This is idealism, sure, but it's powerful idealism. The idea that shared culture and values can create peace, even temporarily, even among enemies. The religious dimension reminds us that ancient peoples invested sport with deep meaning. Modern Olympics are secular, but we still treat them quasi-religiously. Olympic champions become heroes, almost superhuman. We speak of Olympic spirit, Olympic ideals, Olympic legacy. We haven't entirely lost the sense that athletic excellence touches something transcendent. The ancient Olympics also remind us of historical change. For 1,000 years they endured. That's longer than most civilizations. But they still ended. Nothing lasts forever. Religions change. Empires fall. Even institutions that seem eternal eventually disappear. The Olympics teach humility. Your civilization, however glorious, is temporary. But they also teach hope. The Olympics died in 393 AD. For 1,500 years they were gone. Then they were revived. The modern Olympics aren't identical to ancient games, but they're recognizably descended from them. Ideas can survive even when institutions die. Values can be rediscovered and renewed. The flaws of the ancient Olympics, the exclusion of women, non-Greeks and slaves, the class advantages, the political manipulations, the increasing commercialization. These remind us that no institution is perfect. The ancient Olympics fell short of their own ideals, yet the ideals themselves remain valuable. We can admire what the Olympics aspired to be, while acknowledging what they actually were. The modern Olympics inherited both the glory and the problems. We still struggle with commercialism versus amateurism, nationalism versus international cooperation, fair play versus performance-enhancing drugs, inclusion versus traditional structures. The ancient Greeks didn't solve these tensions, and neither have we. But the struggle to balance competing values is itself meaningful. What would ancient Olympic athletes think of modern games? They'd probably be amazed by the technology, synthetic tracks, advanced nutrition, video replay, global television coverage. They'd be shocked by female athletes competing equally with men. They'd be confused by team sports. Ancient Olympics were entirely individual competitions. They'd wonder why athletes wear so many clothes. But they'd recognize the essential elements. Athletes training their entire lives for one moment of excellence. Competitors pushing human limits. The roar of crowds cheering their heroes. The joy of victory. The agony of defeat. The pride representing your homeland. The desire for glory that transcends mere winning. These fundamental human motivations haven't changed in 2,600 years. The greatest ancient Olympic athletes achieved exactly what they sought: immortality through fame. Milo of Croton competed in the 6th century BC. We still know his name 2,500 years later. He won 6 Olympic wrestling crowns and became legendary. Stories about his strength were told for generations. He achieved glory that outlasted his life, his city, even his civilization. That's what Olympic victory offered: a chance at eternity. The lessons of the ancient Olympics are timeless. Excellence requires sacrifice. Glory requires dedication. Victory requires courage. Competition can be noble when governed by honor. Community matters as much as individual achievement. Some things, art, religion, culture, athletic excellence, transcend political divisions. Human potential is worth celebrating. The body is beautiful. Striving for perfection is meaningful, even if perfection is unattainable. As you drift towards sleep tonight, think about those ancient athletes standing at the starting line in Olympia, naked before the gods and 40,000 spectators, about to risk everything for glory. Think about the roar of the crowd, the smell of olive oil and sweat, the dust rising from the stadium floor, the prayers whispered to Zeus. Think about the chariots thundering around the hippodrome, horses straining, drivers risking their lives on every turn. Think about the wrestlers grappling in the sand, bodies locked in competition, neither willing to submit. Think about the boxers exchanging brutal blows, refusing to quit despite exhaustion and pain. Think about the Olympic victors, crowned with simple olive wreaths, knowing their names would echo through eternity. Think about the defeated athletes, crushed by failure, but honored for having competed. Think about the Olympic Truce bringing peace to a warring world, if only for a few months. Think about the great statue of Zeus in his temple, gold and ivory gleaming in candlelight, watching over the sacred games. Think about the sacrifices, the prayers, the hymns sung to honor the gods. Think about the Valley of Olympia, filled with thousands of pilgrims, all gathered to witness human excellence. The ancient Olympics are gone. The temples are ruins. The stadium is empty. The statue of Zeus is lost. But the spirit, the belief that humans can achieve greatness through dedication, that excellence matters, that glory is worth pursuing, that we can be more than we are, that spirit survives. It survives in the modern Olympics, held every 2 years, bringing the world together. It survives in every athlete training before dawn, pushing through pain, chasing their dreams. It survives in every competition where humans test their limits. It survives in our continued admiration for courage, skill, and achievement. The ancient Greeks understood something profound, that life is short, but glory is eternal, that the human body is capable of beauty and power, that striving for excellence gives life meaning, that some achievements deserve to be remembered forever. So sleep well tonight, knowing that 2,600 years ago, humans created something remarkable. A festival of excellence that lasted over a millennium, that brought peace to warring peoples, that celebrated the best of human potential, that honored the gods through athletic achievement. Sleep well and dream of olive wreaths and Olympic glory. Dream of stadiums filled with cheering crowds. Dream of athletes achieving the impossible. Dream of a world where excellence matters, where courage is celebrated, where humans strive to be worthy of the gods. The ancient Olympics are gone, but their legacy lives in every athlete who refuses to quit, in every competition that celebrates human achievement, in every dream of glory that drives us to be more than we are. That's the gift of ancient Olympia. That's what they gave the world. Good night, and may the Olympic spirit live forever.